The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the former defense minister, Yoav Gallant. The court claimed that it found reasonable ground to believe that each bear responsibility for committing the war crime of starvation and crimes against humanity. What effect could this decision have? And how will the United States respond? Joining me now to discuss this and more is Congressman Chris Smith, senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He's the co-chair of the Israeli Allies Caucus, and he's the co-chair of the Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism. He represents the 4th Congressional District of New Jersey. Congressman Smith, welcome back to Washington Watch. Always great to see you.
Great to see you, Tony. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate your work.
Now, the United States does not officially recognize the ICC's authority, but what does this mean? What effect will this have, and how will the United States respond to it?
Well, the United States, as John Thune so eloquently just stated on the Senate floor, should repudiate the indictments. Netanyahu is a tremendous head of state as Prime Minister of Israel and is defending his people against an existential threat posed by Hamas, Iran, Hezbollah, and others who are committed to the complete elimination of Israel and the killing of Jews. He's responding at first to October 7th, when all those horrific atrocities occurred, but it has been ongoing, and it's been something that cried out for what Netanyahu has tried to do, and that is to restore order, to end the bitter fruit of anti-Semitism, especially as conveyed through absolute violence. You know, there's nothing subtle about what Hamas has been trying to do, and I applaud Netanyahu. And frankly, as you pointed out, we have not ratified. Clinton signed the ICC, but that was repudiated by Bush. And the good news is the Senate never even came close to ratifying. Department of Defense is against it for this very reason, that when a just war is being waged, the ICC stands there ready to indict people like a president, or in this case, a prime minister, Netanyahu. So it's outrageous, and we need to, the administration needs to speak out boldly. The problem is, if Netanyahu were to travel to any signatory nation, they would feel potentially obligated by law to arrest him and send him to The Hague for prosecution. Again, absolutely outrageous.
Well, as I played the clip from the European Union's top diplomat, Borrell, he came out in support of the decision, and he says that members of the EU are bound to implement it. I mean, what does that look like for our European allies?
Well, it looks awful. And, it's par for the course. The European Union has been notorious for its siding with the PLO and then the PLA and now Hamas. They've always had their finger on the scale against Israel. And of course, much of that goes back to the very problems of Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. And you would think that they would have learned by now that the killing of Jews, the extermination, the genocide of Jews will never again happen. And Netanyahu has said it will never happen, especially on his watch. So the European Union has failed again, and I find that outrageous as well. But Netanyahu, this needs to be reversed. Even during when we were in a war against Serbia, you might recall years ago, the ICC was looking at potential war crimes against the United States because of the way our pilots were flying in a way that's less likely to lead to their downing by surface-to-air missiles. Are you kidding me? Once there's an aggression, a country like the United States, or like what we thought were our allies, and certainly Israel, which is a close ally, needs the ability to defend itself. And there has been no genocide, crimes against humanity, or anything else being committed by the Israelis. And again, I think it's outrageous. It's a further manifestation of UN and UN type of anti-Semitism. I've chaired 4 congressional hearings in this Congress alone about UNRWA, about the UN Human Rights Council, and how they are just absolutely infiltrated by anti-Semitic personnel who then on a daily basis go after Israel in such cruelty. And they need friends and partners And certainly the administration needs to speak out strongly,
Well,
just like John Thune did.
We did not know that this decision was going to be handed down today, but yesterday the House passed your resolution condemning the global rise of anti-Semitism, which I should say, we saw it on full display here in our country this past year. But prior to that, we saw the rise in Europe, where we see now the statement by the top diplomat in the EU to pursue the ICC's arrest warrants of the Prime Minister. Now, you led this legislation. You sponsored it in the House. Why? I mean, I think this is a perfect example of why that resolution is so important.
Oh, without a doubt. I remember when we were trying to get the OSCE, and I was the head of delegation. It's all the European countries, Russia, and the United States and Canada, to take on the issue of combating anti-Semitism. I was shocked. This was back in the early 2000, 2001, even before that, about the pushback by so many of the countries that make up Europe, and it shocked me, frankly. And I actually did a hearing in 1995 when we took over the House in '94. One of my first hearings was just that, the rising tide of anti-Semitism. And it has only gotten demonstrably worse over the years. And matter of fact, one of my witnesses in 2002, Shimon, a rabbi with the Wiesenthal Center, said, the Holocaust kind of provided a protective Teflon, these are his words, over more overt anti-Semitism. He said that has faded. And that was back in 2002 that he said that. And now, it is just people feel unfettered in their ability to hate Jews and to say it publicly and to act it out through violence. So the ICC, this is one of the worst marks on them imaginable, to indict a sitting prime minister who is defending his country against aggression that is unspeakable.
Sadly, we see some of this anti-Semitism even coming from our own Congress. I mean,
oh, sure.
Now, I will say the vote yesterday was 388 to 21. I mean, that's overwhelming. But there were some like Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who said it does nothing to combat anti-Semitism. And she said, and this is quoting her, dangerously conflates legitimate criticism of Israel to anti-Semitism. Your response to that?
Well, I've had Natan Sharansky, the great human rights defender, several times at hearings. I actually went with Frank Wolf, and I mentioned it yesterday during the debate, to Perm Camp 35 in the Ural Mountains in the 1980s when they were horribly mistreating him. And we went to that Perm camp and visited many of the prisoners of conscience. He said at my hearings, this is Natan Sharansky, legitimate criticism is welcomed. Israel is a democracy, just like the United States. And when constructive criticism is offered, even though it may hurt, it's a good thing. That's what democracies are all about, a marketplace of ideas where all of that conflict in a benign way takes place. That's not the case here. He said, as soon as you enter into what he called the 3 Ds, demonization, delegitimization of Israel, and the third one was delegitimization, demonization, and the ability of just no longer allowing it to exist.
Right.
Once you cross that threshold, what you're doing now, frankly, is saying Israel has no right to exist. So they use that as a cover, that they're just disagreeing with Israel's policies. But then they act out through violence, and they do a terrible thing. But Sharansky was right. We've got to realize this is just a facade for practicing anti-Semitism, and of course, traditional anti-Semitism that goes back through the centuries of hating Jews simply because they happen to be Jewish.
Right.
I think it's demonic,
Well,
we need to call it out.
And you did that yesterday, and we appreciate that. Always great to see you, Congressman Smith. Thanks for joining us.